and his wife caught it, a mild case. Well, they were still there, so he flew home with their twin boys. She stayed in the hotel for a week.
Oh my God.
Insurance paid for it. She wasn't sick at all, just lying on the balcony. Yeah, she suffered.
I need that.
Yeah, he's home with his 8-year-old twin boys.
In other words, she's like best vacation.
Yeah,
ever.
yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, I still feel sick.
Definitely
Oh, I
will
signed up
not
for
be
that
negative
vacation.
for a while.
So yes, our pickleball courts are very dangerous.
I think you just play very competitively.
Gonna play with the hat.
She's in the lead.
I zigged when I should have zagged, but I got the ball over, and then I went down, and I went, oh, this is not good, it just rolled.
It's like Mac Jones.
So when I went down,
It's the Mac Jones of pickleball.
Severe strain,
yeah.
which
So
they
I
say
honestly
can sometimes
thought-
be worse
I
than a
honestly
brain.
thought I just sprained.
Yeah, it looked like
Yes.
it from the way he was agonizing.
Because I could actually stand up after a little while.
He was shocked.
You don't need surgery, do you?
I will find out Monday.
Oh, is it because it's just too swollen? I can't.
Well, they.
All right.
They,
He had a fracture.
We can say that would, the other one would just swear.
so how come John's not here?
It looks like we're already on. I don't know. We'll wait until we see.
Oh, no.
Hi, Pete. Yep, we have everybody here. So we're all good to go.
Okay, just waiting for the video to cut over. I believe we're being broadcast, so I'll wait. It looks like we're good. Okay. Good evening, everybody. We're a bit out of practice here, but we'll get right into it. Tonight is Wednesday, September 28th, and I'll call the meeting of the Finance Committee to order. My name is Pete Berube. I am the chairperson. I'll just ask that we start with Joyce and introduce ourselves, and then we have a new member, and I will introduce him.
Joyce Boyardi.
Peter Underhill.
John Lord.
Jody Garson?
Kathy McInnes?
Sarah Reyes.
And Jim? Or John, sorry.
John Stedman.
John Stedman is joining us via Zoom, and then we have Patrick. Patrick, would you just introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about, not the full bio, just...
Yeah, hi, Patrick Gatto. I'm obviously a Millis resident, family, 2 boys, a boy and a girl at home, and I own a real estate insurance business in Needham, and I've worked in DC doing various political things and nonprofit things, and I'm just back recently and looking to be engaged, so happy to be here.
Thank you and welcome, and
Welcome.
we appreciate you volunteering. So, okay. With that said, meeting's in order. We're going to get right into it, and I'll invite Mr. Gazinski up to, we're going to have a discussion of the warrant articles for the upcoming fall town meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Gazinski, welcome.
Nice
Good
to
see
see
you.
all of you again. Haven't seen you since early July, so hope you had a great summer, and welcome to your new member. I think you have received a very rough first draft of the warrant. The warrant was open for 2 weeks. It just closed this past Monday evening. The select board is meeting again next Monday, at which time they're going to focus their meeting mainly on this warrant. So I will preface my remarks by saying that you will have, I think, a much more filled in and complete warrant next week. But I'd be happy to go through the articles as they stand now and talk about, give you the information I have. And I'm sure if I trip up on any of it, our finance director will fill in any gaps that may exist. So, so with that, is there any general questions before I start going through
No, not for me anyway. I would just ask that you go through it, and if we have questions that pertain to the article list, we'll stop you there.
Excellent, thank you. So Article 1 is well, first, to make sure that the committee knows that the town meeting is being held on the evening of Thursday, November 10th at 7:30. Usually it's held on a Monday evening, but at the request of the election warden, in order not to pile up 2 major events back to back, the select board granted the request to move the meeting to Thursday to give the election workers a little break in between the state election and the town meeting. So that's why it's on November 10th. The first article is a standard article we have at every town meeting to address any unpaid bills. I don't have any specifics for you on that, but I should by your meeting next week. Don't anticipate too large number of bills or a large amount, but I'll have those for you next week. The second article, I believe, will mostly be having to do with the marijuana impact fees. I think we talked in the spring that several of the items that are funded through the marijuana impact fees will have a two-part appropriation, one in the spring and one in the fall. So we'll have those listed again for your meeting next week.
Can you characterize that a little bit, excuse me, characterize that article a little bit more? What's the intent of the article?
The intent of the article is there are a number of services that are funded through
So this is
marijuana.
the impact fund
Yes,
fees
impact fund
and uses.
monies, and we have things such as the school resource officer, the social worker, and other things that were only funded through December. So this article would fund them through next June.
Understood. And I don't know if you saw it, the light bulb went off, and now I immediately know what you're talking about.
Article 3 is the capital article. And as the chair knows, we are working diligently with the capital committee, moving forward on those items. The capital committee has met a number of times. I believe they're meeting again tomorrow night. So the hope is that we'll have some items listed here for the Finance Committee's review by your meeting next week. There's nothing too big in that list. Those are the smaller items, smaller capital items within Article 3. Article 4 is a $1.3 million request for expenditure for the Millis Middle High School building. And I believe that you will have folks from the school committee be coming out and speak with you in regards to this at one of your meetings. So I'll leave it there unless you have any specific questions.
No, I'll just comment. I mean, you're gonna go through a number of larger articles coming up, and we will be aggressively, this will be a short meeting, unfortunately, but we will be aggressively scheduling all of the principals for these articles in the coming, say, 2 weeks. We don't have a bunch of time to wait now. We had invited Council on Aging, for instance, just as an example, to come and talk to us about that initiative and that project. They have deferred till next week, and so, that will put it on, that will just kind of crunch the time that we have to consider any of the articles. So you should anticipate there being some long meetings coming up, probably I'm sure there'll be at least 2 hours coming up for everybody, just so that we can get through these, discuss them deliberately, and then get to a vote on them so that we can make our committee recommendation.
Very good. So the next article on the draft warrant is Article 5. And as you mentioned, this is one of the larger articles for a senior center. Again, I will defer that until that group comes in to speak to you about that, I believe next week, as you mentioned. Article 6, this is in connection with Mass General Law, Chapter 59, Section 5, Clause 22H. There is a section under state law that provides a 100% real estate tax exemption for Gold Star families. Just a little background, Gold Star families are those that had a member of their family pass away as a result of their service in the military. Either it could be anything from in combat to they had a sickness that was caused by, time in their service, and they passed away at a later date. So through that, a lot of towns are adopting this, which would, for widows and family members of in Gold Star families, that they get a 100% tax exemption. I'm speaking with the Veterans Director. There's only one one family that qualifies for that currently in town. And as part of this, for the first 5 years after someone comes on to this program, the state reimburses the town 100% of that exemption. After 5 years, it refunds 50% for the rest of the time that that family is part of the program.
Thank you.
The finance director just wanted me to relay to the finance committee that, you know, the overlay account may have to be adjusted to account for this. So, you know, if this is approved going forward, there may be some additional requests for funding in that, because we have to have those funds available even though we get reimbursement from the state.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
You may.
Mr. Kaczynski, just a question on this. Does the 5 years for the state reimbursement, is that from when this is enacted, or is that from when a family moves to town?
That's from when the family starts taking advantage of the
So
program.
if 10 years from now, a family moves to town, the state will reimburse for 5
5
years?
years.
Okay,
100%
excellent.
for 5, and then 50%
For the remainder?
for the remainder
Excellent.
after that.
Thank you.
Article 7 was also requested by the Veterans Director to see if the town will vote to reduce the residency requirement for local real estate tax exemptions for veterans from 2 years to 1 year. Again, most towns have adopted this or are in the process of adopting this under the current law. If someone moves into town that's a qualifying veteran, they have to live in town for 2 full years before they qualify for any of the exemptions. This would simply reduce that to 1 year. Article 8 has to do with the personnel plan. There's a number of adjustments, some of which we had planned to do at the Springtown meeting, but because of some clerical errors, we needed to postpone that to the fall. So we'll have a detailed list at your next meeting of what those changes are. Article 9 has to do with 12 to 14 Exchange Street. Many of you may have remembered when there was some environmental issues in that area that the town had to act upon. The town has been working with the current owner of the adjacent property that has been dealing with the environmental impact. In researching this, the town certainly has some liability in this area in regards to some environmental issues that occurred a long time ago. This is really a settlement with that property owner in order to address the cleanup that had to happen on that property. That number, that 46,000, may be adjusted upwards. We need to look at also the Phase 2 report that has to be done as part of this environmental cleanup. There'll be some costs associated with that. So that article will be updated at your meeting next week.
Just so we don't defer on everything, can you go into further detail on it now? Give us- Some of us don't know.
Yeah, I can
about
a
it.
little bit. And there's some probably people in the room that know more about the history than I do, because I wasn't here when most of this occurred. But there were some town facilities in that area, and there was some environmental impact in the ground because of that. And because of the groundwater flow, some of that contaminants had migrated over to an adjacent property. We have looked at this with our environmental consultants, and they have confirmed that contamination is flowing from the town property onto an adjacent property. And that property owner did a cleanup that cost approximately $46,000. Actually, it cost more than that. This was a discussion, some negotiations that occurred with the homeowner or the property owner, and this is simply a portion of those costs.
What was the previous town use of the property?
I'd have to it was quite a while ago. I'd have to get back to you to
What is the current use? Is it residential or business?
yeah, it's part of the library and the parking lot and other.
The old library, not the new library?
No, it's part of it's near the current library.
Okay. And what is
There's a
the
town
private?
garage down there.
And the
Yeah.
private owner is one of the businesses?
That's correct.
Okay.
And, we have had discussions with them. We tried to address this issue a number of years ago, but the prior owner would not work with us to address it, would not allow us on their property to do the testing. So we have now gotten the information we need to receive in order to confirm the environmental issues and that this amount is a fair amount in order for the town to really address this issue.
Okay. Does that put it to rest once it's settled?
Well, it does for the time being. Like I said, we do need to do a Phase 2 report, but that's really between the town and the Department of Environmental Protection. There's a process we need to go through in order to, until they close this out, which could be a number of years, we need to do reports and monitoring to make sure that the contaminants don't flow anywhere else. But I would expect that, it would take care of it for some time.
What is the nature of the contaminants?
I believe it's some types of petroleum products.
Okay, all right. I've exhausted all of my questions. I think I understand. But
I understand, but I'm not exactly sure where 12 to 14 Exchange Street is. I know you said near the library, but is that where the new apartments have been built? Or is that
It's
closer to
behind-
where
it's-
Saigon
it's-
is?
It's behind some of the businesses on Exchange Street, and
It's behind Victory Lane,
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay.
behind Stack, is that Stack?
yes,
So it's where the
behind
new
there and
buildings
behind the
were
library
put.
in that area,
So,
parking lot.
so I'll just repeat. The question is, kind of help us understand where it is, and the answer from the crowd, for those that are listening, is it's basically behind some of the businesses, Victory Lane being one of them, Stacked, some of the apartment buildings back there in that area, so. Okay. Please press on. Thank you.
The next item has to do with the transfer of $25,000 from really the marijuana impact funds to Advisa for their initial deposit related to an HCA agreement that they signed with the town. As part of an agreement they signed with the town where they had planned to establish a testing and manufacturing facility at the Colt location. They have now determined that because of zoning and other state marijuana-related restrictions, that they can't use that building. So they have withdrawn their application to move forward, and as part of that, the town had agreed to refund the funds if they did not move forward with their project. So, but we need an appropriation in order to do that. So that was their deposit. So it would come out of the marijuana impact funds.
Thank you.
Article 11, this is a transfer of $128,721.70 to fully fund the FY22 snow and ice deficit. So this closes last year's books on snow and ice. Article 12 has to do with the DPW, the Water Enterprise. This is for a requirement of the state requiring the town to do a lead line service inventory and replacement plan throughout the whole town. So we need to check to see if there are any lead lines going from the main pipes to individual homes. So that's part of a program that we need to do. And I believe we will be able to get a grant for the full amount of this. I believe the cost is $139,000. The grant is written in such a way that the town does need to borrow the funds first, do the project, and then we'll be reimbursed for those funds. So that's why you see that as a possible borrowing.
I'm going to tiptoe into this one a little bit too. So are there lead lines in town?
There are some lead lines that go from, they're really mostly on the private properties. The main lines we don't have any lead main lines that I'm aware of.
So if this is an inventory, like basically a study or a report, I'd assume that this isn't the first one that's done. Is it an update to see what has been done since the previous one was published?
I'll have to defer that to the DPW director. I'd
Would you
probably
prepare
rather
him for that question?
Sure, I will certainly do that, to ask him to speak to the committee about that.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair? I
Mr.
seem to remember on the last warrant article, there was something about lead lines and funding for investigation as well. I don't have the last warrant article. Does anyone else remember this?
No.
No?
Do not.
I remember discussing it at some
Okay.
point, but they all blend together.
I think this short discussion of the question I just asked would answer that, and maybe,
Yeah.
you know,
And just
I'm
to-
curious as to, I don't think any of us particularly care for reports and studies, even though they're mandated and required, that go on a shelf and nothing happens with them 5 years later, or 10 years later, what have you. So that's all.
Yeah, unfortunately, this one is required.
Understood.
The next article, Mr. Chair, is Article 13. Actually, before I get to 13, I just want to let you know there is likely to be several more DPW-related articles that will probably be inserted after Article 12, and we'll have those for your next meeting. They have to do with items such as some PFAS work, and a few other items that having to do with our new water permit that we have to negotiate with the DEP. So we will have those on the next draft, assuming that the select board votes to add those at their meeting next Monday. So I just want to give you a heads up that there will be a few additional articles on the warrant. that I
Will
anticipate.
they be requests for funding?
Yes, but no funding from the general fund. These are all items that either be partially through grants or through water, sewer, stormwater enterprise funds.
Thank you.
Article 13, vote to raise and appropriate or transfer a sum of money to the unemployment account. Again, we'll have a dollar figure. We should have that for your next meeting. We'll be talking with the select board about the funding of that at their meeting on Monday. So Article 14 is a FEMA floodplain zoning bylaw. We should have the language for that, hopefully, in the warrant for your meeting next week. This is, again, an item required by the federal government. If we were not to do it, it would put in jeopardy a lot of insurances for different locations in town. So it's required that we do update that. Article 15, vote to accept Hickory Hills subdivision. Obviously, the actual full article will include all the streets and all the details. Just wanted to make you aware that the board is looking at moving forward with the adoption of that.
That's off of Farm? Not Farm,
Yeah, where's
Acorn?
the location?
Acorn, thank you.
Yeah, correct. Article 16 is for putting funds into the Opeb trust fund. And again, the select board will be discussing that next Monday to determine the appropriate amount to put into that account.
Fully funded?
Well, the,
If you want to just shut down the entire town government for a year, you can get close.
Oh, that's all right.
Article 17, this is the Chapter 41, Section 111 Injury Leave Indemnity Fund that was established, I believe, in the spring. We'll be looking to put some funds into that, and that, again, we'll have some, hopefully we'll have an amount set for that at your meeting next week. Article 18 was at the, after discussions between the fire chief and the finance director about establishing a special purpose stabilization fund for the purchase of ambulances. And I'll probably, I'll let Carol take a stab at that if she wants to.
Wow, right under the bus.
what are friends for?
Under the ambulance, actually.
Under the ambulance, yeah. No hesitation.
So this is just an account to set, we're just setting the fund up, and we're not funding it at this point. And this spring, we'll probably ask for some funding it'll come from the ambulance revolving fund. Because the ambulance revolving fund is a special revenue fund, and all of the monies received have to go into that revolving fund. We can't designate money directly from that, from the ambulance receipts over to this fund, but we can fund it from the ambulance revolving fund. So,
Can you explain
Yeah,
the
you-
difference between those two mechanisms?
so the ambulance revolving fund is all monies coming in from receipts of the ambulance or to pay for the ambulance service. This way, we are allowed to take money from that fund to put into a stabilization fund, so like a savings account, until we have sufficient funds to purchase an ambulance with it. It obviously would take 2/3 of the town meeting vote to be able to acquire the ambulance, but we can fund it every year. So when the next time comes for us to have to buy an ambulance, we should have sufficient funds in here so that we wouldn't have to borrow.
So if I understand correctly, as the receipts come in, they can't go into a revolving fund, but they can be.
No, they
I mean,
are
into
designated, they can't go, because they're already designated to go into the revolving fund, that's how it was set up.
Right.
We can't then have part of it go to this. Everything has to go into the revolving fund. And then we can, from the revolving fund, transfer money to this stabilization fund.
At town meeting vote?
At town meeting vote.
Okay,
Right,
that makes,
At town meeting
all right,
vote.
I understand.
Okay.
Mr.
Thank you.
Chair, how much, is it 100% going from the original revolving fund to this one to be set up? Will all the money be going into the new one?
No, only a portion that's going to be set aside for the ambulance. So if we have the ability to fund it for 5,000 next year or 10,000 the year after to put into this, it's essentially a savings account that can only be used for the purchase of an ambulance.
So sometimes there might not be that much money. What's the rest of the money in the original fund being used for?
In the ambulance revolving fund?
Yes, please.
So this particular year, I believe it's $412,000 is being used to fund part of the operating budget for the fire department.
For staff?
Which is the staff,
For
for the
paramedic, okay,
paramedics.
for staff.
And then next year, we'll have to fund a portion of not only what we fund now, but additional for the SAFER grant will, and we'll have to fund the remaining for firefighters from that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks. Maybe sit tight there,
Okay.
now that you're up front.
Getting near the end here, Article 19, it's a pretty standard article we have to transfer from available funds a sum to the stabilization fund, and we definitely do anticipate a transfer into that fund at the fall town meeting, and hopefully have an amount to bring back to the Finance Committee after the Select Board's meeting next Monday.
Oh, good.
If you're done with that article, I would like to, I have a question on Article 17.
Okay.
So how will injury leave be paid out of this indemnity fund? What is that mechanism anticipated to be? Once it's funded, then how do funds come out?
So once it's funded, then we will be paying for whatever injured firefighter or police officer we have to pay their payroll every payroll. So every payroll, the funds will come from this fund for the person who is in the OJI 111F.
So that would be able to be tapped basically on an ongoing basis?
Yes.
It wouldn't require a transfer at town meeting?
No,
Okay.
it would fund the payroll, every payroll for any on-the-job injury for a police officer or firefighter.
Much like the workers' comp or?
Yes.
Okay.
And this will certainly help mitigate some of the overtime expenses and other expenses that come through on the fire and police budgets that have had issues with people that are out. This will certainly help that.
Well, not really.
Well, because the insurance.
You just won't be paying for a firefighter twice out of the operating fund. You'll be
Right,
paying
but-
for one out of the operating fund and one out of the indemnity fund.
Correct, but oftentimes the insurance doesn't cover 100% of the town's liability for that officer that is out. So it will help. It won't eliminate it, it'll help. But
I
you're
just
right.
want to be careful when you
A
say
larger
that,
cost.
to think, oh, overtime's
Yeah,
going
no,
away.
let's
It's
put a
not.
line
It's not
No,
going away.
the, what'll happen is that the officer that is covering, that won't come out of
Correct.
this. But for the officer that's out, anything that's currently not covered and it's still coming out of the
Understand.
budgets will, so that will help the bottom line of the salary budgets within.
Understand.
those
I just think it
lines.
behooves us to be very clear, you know, in simple terms. It's a savings fund to pay for the injured person. There's still going to be an extra cost to replace the injured person, which would come out of the operating
Yes.
budget. Thank you.
So the last four articles are that we have, well, I think there was three listed on yours, but we have four, because one did arrive shortly before the select board's meeting on Monday evening. So we have three articles that were submitted by one petitioner, and all, I think, related to senior services, senior structures, and then one having to do with a different property in town. So I will certainly let the petitioners speak to those.
Thank you. I do have some questions, though, about, in general, what the petition articles at town meeting, what are the mechanics of going through, voting on a particular petitioned article? It's been discussed elsewhere, actually, at the Capital Planning Committee meeting, as to whether that would be potentially an authorization or an appropriation, potentially to borrow if it passes. If Article 20, and I don't even know what that is, so I'm glad it's not listed. If Article 20 passes, do we vote, keep going on Article 21, or is it likely to be dismissed, et cetera, et cetera? You know, what are the permutations of if a petition article passes, you know, what happens?
There's a lot of variables there, which I am not going to delve into. I will say that, a couple things. I will say that, number one, I don't think there's any automatic response, depending on what passes and what doesn't. I think there's certainly different approaches to that. I will also say that even if town meeting votes to authorize the select board to take, and the treasurer to take action, that doesn't mean it directs or they must.
It likely goes to ballot.
Well, not just that.
Depending
not
on the
just
dollar
that,
figure.
But, yeah, but if, say, two items pass, and both of them are for the overlap, the select board could just choose to act on one of them and not act on the other. So that's kind of what I want to make clear. The town isn't bound to it. It's an authorization. It's a borrowing authorization. It's not a borrowing directive. So I just want kind of everyone to be aware of that. I think, obviously, you have 4 additional articles that submitted by petition that are going to need discussion, going to be acted on in one form or another by town meeting, and that, you know, in some ways they work counter-purpose to each other, so there's going to have to be some thought, and I don't have all those answers as to how the town wants to pursue that.
Yep.
And certainly, once the dust clears from the town meeting, the select board will have to decide how to move forward.
Okay, well, that'll be at the discretion of the select board. They put the warrant together. So for us to be aware of, my intent is to have all of these articles, petition articles, citizens petition articles discussed. I believe the article put forth by Lisa Harden, who's I believe you're the primary petitioner on the most recent article. I believe that will be next week. I could be wrong.
Nope, October 5th.
I think that's next
Yep,
week.
it is.
Uh,
Peter has it all
And
down.
then the other 3, who I believe the lead petitioner is Mr. Germain, and he will be scheduled for the 10th. So I just want to ask 12th, I'm sorry. Thank you. Yeah, that would be 7 plus 5 plus 7, 12. That we will take those up, but there are presentations, and as well as Article 5. In other words, just a long way of saying we need to do some prep and not just rely on the presentations. So Council on Aging will come to us to give their presentation. We already have their slides. I would ask that we review those at your own time so that you're just prepared to, ask poignant questions, and you have a basic knowledge of it, just so we can facilitate the discussion, if you're able to. So that would I think, be helpful for all of us. Okay.
The only final, Madam Chair, that I want to add is that I do have the articles listed 1 through 22, but that, the actual order of the articles hasn't been formally decided by the Select Board yet. This is simply a list I put together, so there is a possibility that the ordering may change. I just want to give you a heads up on that. So that'll be decided probably on Monday when the board meets to discuss how to present the articles to the town meeting.
Okay. I asked Carol to stay because I was going to ask her a quick question that's asked every fall and that she doesn't answer every
I
fall
do have
until.
the answer.
What is the free cash situation?
The free cash has been certified, and so I will send it along to you, but the free cash amount for the general fund is $2.9 million.
Wow. Okay. Thank you. I'm sorry to
You're welcome.
put words in your mouth.
No, I knew you'd be asking. Glad I could help.
All right. Okay, anything else for Mr. Kaczynski, or really any questions on the draft warrant?
Mr. Chair, I have a quick question regarding the floodplain. Does the Select Board have to hold a public hearing on it, like the zoning board, like the planning board does on its articles? Zoning articles?
Great question. I will have to get back to you on
All right, it's like a 3-4 week process, so you might want to,
We'll take a look at that.
okay, thank you.
And I did have one question about the floodplain as well.
Sorry, Joyce, go ahead.
As far as the floodplain, is that changing at all as far as the demographics of the floodplain? Or is it just the art? Will anything
Is it
change?
increased?
Yeah, does the,
I think there may be some changes in that. And again, most of this is through the federal government and their regulations, so at the risk of, I don't want to say anything out of turn, so let me get back to you on that.
Okay.
And we'll see if we can bring someone next week that can provide some information.
yeah.
Or just a document, Mr. Chair. We might not need someone to come here, just maybe there's a little summary that goes with it saying how the new bylaw will affect Millis zoning.
Mr. Chair?
Ms. Garzon?
Ms. McGinnis brought up a good point. If we could get an update on the Arpa funds, as we discuss free cash, to just kind of understand what we've received and what's been spent and what's not been received but has been promised, perhaps?
We have received all of the funding
Okay.
at this point. We received the funding from the county earlier in the year, and we received the final payment from the U.S. Treasury. It came in 2 separate funds. We received that as well. So we have all the funding here, and it's all being used for the water treatment plant, and that I have to do a reporting out next week for the county, so I'll have that information for you on next Wednesday.
That'd be great to understand in context of everything else that we're looking at spending out of, our various enterprise funds, to know, what has been offset by those ARPA funds.
Right.
Thanks.
Okay.
Because, Mr. Chair, there is talk of another PFAS treatment facility. I think the engineer, the consultant mentioned Monday that the town needs 2 treatment facilities for their wells.
Yes, that may be
So-
one of the other articles you
Right.
may see next week, will be really some of the initial planning for that, for that next
So maybe if
step.
ARPA could pay for that one.
Has there been any, are you familiar, and I'm certainly happy to, I know, it sounds like Mr. McKay will be here either next week or the following, but are you aware of any of the testing results over the summer, our PFAS levels, as we monitor, separate from the treatment plant construction, we are monitoring. What are the
Yes.
levels? What have they been?
Yes, I don't have that update, but I can certainly ask the DPW director to be prepared to come in and discuss the updates based on, the testing that has been done.
Sure.
I don't think there's been any radical change, but.
Because there's been no rain.
Now we got some.
Up until about 3 weeks ago, there's been
It
no
was
rain.
perfect, no PFAS anywhere.
No rain, yes.
Okay.
My lawn didn't look that good, but, yeah.
Okay. I've been wholly ignoring Mr. Stedman. I'm sorry about that. Anything from Zoom?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it. I have a couple of things that I think would be interesting for the committee to have, if not at the next meeting, at some time shortly. Carol did answer the funds that might be available, and we will have more on that. But last year, there was a big problem with SPED funding. I know that the school year has just started, but I'm wondering if the school board could address the outlook for SPED funding for fiscal year '23. So we have an early warning if there's likely to be a surprise there. They may have a feel for whether or not the budget is in good shape for that. But that was a big number last year. At the spring meeting, and when we did the budget, some of the union contracts had not been settled. Can the town administrator brief us on the impact of the finalized contracts on the budget, whether or not there's there will be an issue because of that settlement versus what was in the budget? And again, these are questions that if they can't be answered tonight, I'm raising them so that we have the answers before we get too far down the road. I'm wondering if the bonds have been issued for the PFAF plant and the delivery date on the new fire engine. So those are some things that I think would be helpful.
On the contracts, I can tell you that the police and dispatch contracts were negotiated back and wrapped up back in April. And I believe the funds
Yep.
associated with those were in the budgets at the Springtown meeting. I can tell you that we are still in negotiations with the SEIU, the AFSCME, and the firefighters union. So we are still in negotiations, so I don't have anything new to report on those, except we are still meeting. I just met this morning with the AFSCME union. So again, those are ongoing, and as soon as I have anything to report that I can report to the Finance Committee, I will.
Will those discussions, results of those discussions be retroactive to a certain date back in time, or?
They can be.
From?
They can be. It all depends on the negotiation.
Okay,
So,
good luck.
thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Underhill?
back to the lead line situation.
Wait a minute.
Oh,
I have
John,
the floor,
I'm sorry.
Mr. Chair.
I apologize, Mr. Stedman.
I had the opportunity to meet the social worker, and that sounds like it's going very well. And I think from what I hear, we did a good job deferring that and actually getting it with the police department. It seems to be working very well from the feedback I have. Thank you. I yield back.
Okay. I'm just going to follow up on what you asked. So we will have some sort of data back from the school, at least a request to them regarding SPED funding. We answered union contract. PFAS plant will address to
Vaughn.
Mr. McKay for next time we see him. We'll get a date on a fire engine delivery unless you have that handy.
I do not. I'll
Okay,
have to
we'll
check
get that.
the chief.
And I think that's it, Mr. Stedman. Kathy, bonds?
I think one of yours was bonds on PFAS, I think. Maybe I misunderstood you, Mr.
We
Stedman.
just have bans right now.
Right.
Yeah, I was wondering if the bonds have been
Bonds.
issued.
Oh, bonds
That's
issue.
all.
Yeah.
So that when we have the debt schedule.
Right, so at this point, we only have a ban on that. So it's a bond anticipation note, so it's an annual that needs to be renewed. So it's not finalized yet. We won't be able to finalize that until after we've spent all of the ARPA funds on and see what the remaining portion is. We would only want to bond the true cost remaining for the town, so.
Okay.
No rush.
Okay. You're getting the north-south head shake, so that's, thank you for the answer. Mr. Underhill?
Just circling back to the lead pipe, Mr. Kaczynski, I think we should let Mr. McKay know that, according to my notes, we funded $139,000 for a lead pipe survey. He presented that to this committee on March 9th,
the
2022.
survey. Yeah.
So whether this is ongoing or another one, we would have some questions along those lines.
Yes, so this is the same one, and I think I will defer this ultimately to the finance director, but I will say that we will not spend that money twice. So the reason we're coming back at this time for an article for the $139,000 is because, again, we were informed since then under the grant program, we have to borrow the money. We can't just expend it. We have to borrow the money, do the project, and then we can get reimbursed. It's a special grant program. So that $139,000 that was originally appropriated will not be spent directly on that. I think there was a plan on how to
Right.
handle that.
So on that particular item, what will happen is, for the vote that will take place, we will bond for that $139,000, but that $139,000 will be removed from the water budget for fiscal '23. So it is a zero principal grant, but in order for us to get the grant, we have to get a loan. So we will set up.
Really, why
we'll-
is that?
Politics.
I don't know, but there's so there were two items that the DPW was, or the water department, and Enterprise have, but they both are, you have to get a loan. It's a zero principal grant
That's the nature of the program. is you have to
from the
go
Water
through a
Resource
borrowing
Trust.
in order to get the funding back.
Mr.
Even
Chair?
if you could afford to.
It's the exact opposite.
I know,
We
which
just
we
talked
did in
about
the
with
spring.
ARPA money. You've got to spend the
Right.
ARPA
In
money
order to
before you
get the
borrow
grant,
this. You have to
yes.
borrow before you get the grant.
Thank you.
So follow-up question, Mr. Chair? I'm just a little
for
confused.
it.
Where is that 139,000 returning to? The general fund?
No, because it's not a general fund purchase, it's an enterprise, so it's
Oh,
the
go back
enterprise
to
fund.
the
So
enterprise
it will be-
funds.
So the enterprise budget will be reduced for fiscal year '23, they won't need that money.
Okay.
And then we will fund it from the grant money that we get. And then, so any of that would flow to the retained earnings for the water fund.
Great,
So
thank you.
essentially just won't be spent. It'll
Right.
refer back to their water reserves.
Thank you.
Okay, all very good discussion, very detailed, hard to remember all this stuff. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much.
Good notes, Mr. Underhill.
Question my memory. It's foggy, but it's in there.
No, never again.
I know, I was
that
amazed when
happens
you're
when you're
able to
clerk.
actually go into the book.
Was that when you were
You
taking
had
the
a
minutes?
premonition.
Yes,
I know.
I still am, just for my own education.
No, we all
right?
do
Yeah.
that, but
No, you
Yeah,
had a
take the minutes, you
premonition that
remember
that
those
was
things.
coming.
Okay, next.
Yeah,
I knew it was in there.
I
Like,
know,
how does no
that
one
was
else remember this?
amazing.
Next up on our agenda is the committee liaisons. And I'll start. First and, or I guess most dear to my heart is the Capital Planning Committee. It's one of the ones we discussed. I am not seeking to continue to represent the Finance Committee on that, on the Capital Planning Committee. I will, lacking any other volunteers. I think we had some expressed interest in that committee. You know, I've been in town for 8 years. I don't know how long I've been on this committee. You know, I don't keep track of these things. I've been on the Capital Planning Committee. I don't think it's the chair's responsibility to be on that particular committee. You know, I can still attend if I want to. I can become an at-large member if I wanted to. I just think it's prudent that the input and the perspective change from time to time. So I'm happy to relinquish that responsibility and accept other nominations from persons here. So,
I'll step up.
okay, there's one,
I will too.
two.
Capital.
Alligator arms.
Okay, so John and Kathy have both stepped forward to volunteer to represent the Finance Committee on that meeting. You know, anything that you see that's capital or, you know, big ticket items before the town gets discussed there. You know, there's a lot of work that's done. It's nothing. John and Kathy are both good representatives and knowledgeable representatives that could serve the committee well on that. So, you know, I don't know if you want to make a pitch or if somebody wants to make a motion. I would add that I would suggest that the transfer of that responsibility happen after fall town meeting. Just because the capital planning committee is working through this current cycle of capital requests. We've already started ranking, prioritizing projects. It doesn't, I don't think it would be prudent to, you know, have a transition in the middle of that process. So that would be my input. I'm happy to do it until the end of this particular, you know, fall town meeting or town meeting cycle.
I think in that case, it might be prudent to hold off on voting on that until town meeting. You know, because we have our meeting before town meeting, and we could vote at that point. Otherwise, we have a standing vote for something in the future, but we've authorized someone.
You could have an effective date, but either way, the reason that this is still being discussed is because I had hoped to have this transition happen over the summer prior to starting the fall. I mentally checked out from town governance and finance committee over the summer, and I hope you all.
That's what happens when you go to Hawaii.
I hope you all did too. So, you know, either way works for me. We can come back to this. I will still entertain a motion, or if the motion is to defer, that's fine too. I'm not the king, I'm just the chairperson, so. No motions heard? We'll defer, okay. If there are other committee representatives on the other committees that are looking to, when their term is up, that usually will happen in the spring. You know, we'll let them lie until the spring, but if, you know, there's conservation, sidewalks, there is, what else is there, Jody?
We
A
haven't,
CPC, I'm a liaison,
yeah.
and I was thinking of
That's
surrendering.
the other one, the other CPC.
Community
We're-
preservation.
We're actually the
Yeah,
other
yeah, I was going
CPC.
from
You're
one,
the,
well, I was requesting from one to the other,
There's community preservation
which is,
and
a
conservation.
non-voting,
So you're CPC?
yes.
Okay, and then John is on conservation?
conservation, right, John?
Yes,
Okay.
I serve on that. I'm not
He's
an
not a
observer. I'm a
liaison,
member.
you're a member.
He's a member.
He's an unofficial liaison.
Is a mole.
He's
Um,
a select board appointment.
The sidewalk, you know, that's more or less defunct. I actually probably am interested in that one. I don't know. I'll probably throw my name into that one. Maybe I can revive it.
Can you just explain what the liaison's responsibilities were? Just because since I've been
Sure.
on, we were gonna do it, but then we didn't,
Right.
so just kind
Yeah,
of.
sorry.
Thank
Happens
you.
since I came on, so, yeah.
So on these, basically you are, in most cases, I'll just give you my experience on the capital planning committee. The rep is a voting member of, I think, a 9-person committee, if I'm correct on this. I could be wrong, maybe it's 7. I don't think it's 5, maybe it's 5. But, so there's a school board member on there, there's a select board member on there. There's at least 1 and I think maybe 2 at-large members that are voting members. Currently, it's John Corcoran and
The chair.
the chair, Mr. Barry, thank you. So there's at least 5 of us on there, and so we meet every time the budget cycle comes around, or the town meeting cycle comes around, there are capital requests, which is not a very black and white definition of what a capital request is. We've tried to refine that over the years. But anytime there's a expenditure that the town departments or others, in this case, citizens petitions, will be likely be discussing those. We'll see. That's actually up for discussion. But anytime that there's an outlay for a project that, could, it's independent of funding. So even if it's a project that is for the sustainment and betterment of a town asset, capital asset, whether it be a building, a road, a utility system, we used to have school curriculum on there. We've tried to whittle that off, get those requests into budgets. Sometimes vehicles are on there, but sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're added to operating leases. So it's not always black and white, what is in, what is out. But those requests, regardless if they're grant funded, whether they come from borrowing, whether they come from a tax override, they get evaluated. Each project gets evaluated based on the information that's provided by the proponent or the requester. We discuss them. We have a kind of a tool that we use to grade the projects in terms of their criticality and their need and their benefit to the town, and whether they have the potential to reduce operating costs, whether they are for the greatest benefit of the town, citizens, a number of factors. And then they go into this scoring matrix algorithm. It's really just a
long the
spreadsheet.
other night.
Such a spreadsheet. Oh, that's nothing. It's just a spreadsheet.
Does it help the people that come into the building, or does it help the
Yeah.
staff 1
Yeah.
to 10?
Yeah.
It was
Yeah, we were talking,
painful.
the other night, we were talking about, there's keyless, one of the requests that's coming up for town meeting will be keyless entry in this
That one
building.
was just-
And there are others, it's, some of the stuff, it's like, we'll argue about whether some costs.
AC.
Again, it doesn't matter if it's $3,000 or $30 million, we're still gonna discuss it and evaluate it. The funding is up to the select board and the town, and this committee, and the town voters to decide if they think it's the right use of their tax dollars. We're just trying to make a recommendation that, yes, the project is needed. Sometimes we get really far down into the weeds and we say, well, for instance, the tennis courts is one that comes to mind, the pickleball courts, is that the best way, is the best way to attenuate sound and address resident neighbors' concerns? Is it to put up fabric? Is it to put up trees? Is it to move the pickleball courts? We really only get to evaluate what's being proposed, but occasionally we'll go a little further and say, well, have you looked at this? We debated last year at length, ad nauseum, was whether or not, how many skid steers the town was gonna purchase for snow removal. And that was a good discussion to have, I personally think. It was painful, and,
Really not selling
Yeah, I was
this.
gonna say, you're really not.
hey, you
Well,
gotta know.
let's talk
what
about
wanna
the
be
community
honest.
preservation, okay? You're non-voting, but the community preservation is very interesting because every homeowner pays toward it on your tax bill. And you apply, a group will apply for the money, and there's buckets that it comes in. And like Mr. Stedman was very active in it at the last go-around. Again, you don't vote, but your input, and you learn. That's the thing, you learn about the people and what's going on in town. And it's a great, I've been on it, I was on it since its inception, so I think it's time for someone else to really take a grasp, and because there's some interesting issues coming up. Not so much this year, and also, down the road next year for rehab to here and rock lawn, and so I hope you consider it.
Mr. Chair.
I would certainly serve on that one. Kathy, if you want to, when you're ready to resign, I would throw my hat in the ring
Okay.
to participate in that.
Okay, maybe we'll just wait till the next cycle? Is that what you're thinking of?
Likely,
Okay,
likely.
So one of
At
the,
least until the next cycle or to the end of the terms, because they are documented in terms of who is the community, the committee representative on the particular committees, and I think it gives a duration. So we'll either do it at the end of,
you might like it.
fall town meeting cycle or at the end of the term.
2 or 3 meetings.
Jody, go ahead.
Yeah.
yeah, one of the challenges that we had in putting together our policies and procedures is that there's not a lot written down. So, you know, we went through the documents that we were able to review, and we have a section on liaisons and representatives, but it was hard to point to what are the actual, you know, responsibilities of the finance committee on certain committees, other than capital planning and conservation committee and CPC. Those three are mentioned in our policies and procedures, but there are probably others that it would make sense. And, you know, I think that's just part of our ongoing effort at actually documenting town-wide policies and procedures that I know the select board has done a lot of work on. And we'll just continue to refine it and define what are the different committees that we want liaisons to.
But it's primarily those four other main ones, the capital project, conservation, sidewalk, and community preservation are the four.
I mean,
As
we
of
don't even
now.
mention sidewalk, but,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
and
Those are
so,
I'm just jotting down.
I know,
Yeah,
who
but
the- I know
I
who the
mean-
rep was for sidewalk. I don't know that there was ever a meeting in the, you know, in his
Good gig.
particular, it's just a defunct committee, you know. Unless it gets attention and some light shined on it, you're not gonna know, you know. It may or may not meet. I don't know that for a fact, but I would tell you that the capital plan, this committee, the finance committee, I think is very influential. And it's not so much that I think that we could, in some cases, compel voters one way or another with our committee recommendations. I actually think that a lot of the ways that we can compel or convince or influence an outcome of a warrant is actually during discussion in our meetings. The select board attends these meetings regularly. They know what we're thinking. They know, they participate, and I think they talk about the things, well, how is the finance committee leaning on something? You know, just because the finance committee votes something up or down, doesn't necessarily mean that they're gonna change how an article is written, but they have in the past, and I think they did it 2 years ago. We wrote them a letter. We didn't particularly care for something that was on the warrant, and we gave them that feedback prior to town meeting, and they made the changes, and it helped. You know, I think it was a good thing. The capital planning committee is also influential. We give the select board feedback and this committee feedback on, hey, we don't think that this is the best use of resources, or let me rephrase that. We don't think that this is as high of a need as some other project when we prioritize things. And we have an opportunity to influence that way. And again, that committee has a school board representative on it, and also a select board member on there. So there are good opportunities. The capital planning committee, I would say, is a little bit more tedious work than this. But this has a little bit more, I think, impact than that committee does. So it's almost like another one of these committees, and, you know, another duty, the capital planning committee. It meets once a week, just like this one does, usually in the run-up to town meetings, whether it be spring or fall. So, in terms of time-wise. Okay? All right. Any,
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Stedman? Thank you.
I don't see really any value that the Finance Committee can add to the Conservation Commission. Conservation Commission is responsible for enforcing the Wetlands Protection Act. We really don't spend any money and don't have an impact on the budget or really forward planning in any way. It's really administering the Wetlands Protection Act. The meetings are open, anybody's welcome to come, but I'm not sure a liaison would serve any purpose. That's just my opinion,
Okay, and I may have
having
misspoke
served
if
on
you-
that for
I
2.5
may-
years.
I may have misspoke. You attend because you are an at-large representative, not a FinCom
No,
representative.
I am a
correct?
commissioner. I am a commissioner. I am a
But-
voting commissioner.
Right, but
I
you-
do not attend that as a representative of
Yeah,
finance.
thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. So, okay,
so it's really just the two that are written in our,
yep.
yep. Well, if there's others that
You know, perhaps we
should
think
have
about,
liaisons to.
I mean, you guys will not like what I'm about to say, but perhaps we, you know, just like the select board attends this meeting, perhaps we should have a representative that attends, not a voting member, but attends a school board meeting or attends a select board meeting. We probably ought to, I think we ought to do that, whether it's a rolling
The select board,
representation.
the select board has never attended one of our meetings, nor nor is the town administrator.
At the conservation. Yeah, I'm suggesting that we have a
That's right.
rolling representative from this committee at select board meetings and at school board meetings. And then, you know, we report back as by exception, if there's something that we think that would be useful information to the committee, you know, so, I don't know.
I think it
Wonder
makes
what everybody
sense.
thinks about that.
I think we've had a lot of informal networks here at work in the town, but as the town grows and changes and new people move in and other people move out, informal networks probably can't be as relied upon.
Sure.
So it probably makes sense to formalize things more, as we've been doing.
Okay. Do you think we do that through language in our charter? And I think, yes, we do. I'm not trying to play stump the dummy. I think we should. But should we wait? Or can we just say, let's come up with a schedule, or every week we come up with a volunteer that goes to those two particular meetings and says, you know, comes back and brings some notes?
I think at this point it can be informal with volunteers, but I think as maybe, because time is tight
Right.
for us, but once we get into spring, I think we should formalize it.
Okay.
And, you know, having a tri-board meeting helps with that as well.
Okay, I agree. So we've tried a tri-board over, a little bit over the summer and didn't get much traction. It wasn't because it wasn't considered, it wasn't forgotten about, but it definitely didn't happen. So if you thought you missed the tri-board meeting, so if you're not aware, the tri-board meeting is when those three committees, school board, select board, and finance committee get together and discuss interlapping issues. That didn't happen this summer, but it definitely will happen after fall town meeting, usually before the spring budget kickoff. So, and we'll all be, you know, expected to attend that. It'll be a blast. I don't mean to say it like
As it always is.
Okay. All right, so let's move on to approve some payable bills.
Mr. Chair,
Ms. Garzon.
I move that we approve the payment of $5,665 to ClearGov Software, or ClearGov Inc.
Second that?
It's been moved and seconded that the committee vote to approve payment of bills in the amount of $5,665 for ClearGov Software for use in the finance office.
Mr. Chair?
Ms. Garzon.
So I just checked to check the page to see if it's been updated, and it has been. So it looks like the town is updating the site. It looks like it's only through fiscal year 2022, but that's better than it
Yeah,
was. So it's being used, so that's good to know.
For those of you that don't know or have never checked this out, it could answer some burning questions that you might have about town finances and tax, you know, per capita and where money is spent. This ClearGov site, essentially, anybody, you know, can compare tax rates and tax expenditures and budgets to surrounding towns, et cetera, et cetera. It's probably not it's not as well known as one would think it is, and it's probably not used as much as, you know, it would answer a lot of questions that people have about, you know, where Millis lies compared to others. That doesn't necessarily change things just because you know where you lie compared to Medfield or Medway or all the questions that we see on the public forum. But the fact of the matter is the information is there, and I, for one, think that the information has to be there. It has to be available to people whether they use it or not. People have a right to know where their dollars are, you know, what they're being used for.
Yeah.
So-
ClearGov.com.
So, okay, so it's been moved and seconded. Any more discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? And no, nobody abstaining. Got that, Deirdre?
Aye.
Yes, actually, I did. I have more notes tonight than I ever thought I would.
Okay. The next bill that's before us is for dues and subscriptions to the Association of Town Finance Committees.
Mr. Chair,
Ms. Garzon.
I move that we pay $184 to the Association of Town Finance Committees.
Second?
Moved and seconded that we vote to approve payment of $184.00 to the Association of Town Finance Committees. This is for annual dues to belong to this association for $184 for the year from July 22 through June 30th of 23. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any nays? Any abstentions? Thanks for the thumb, John. Okay, cruising right along. Old business, new business. If, I would just say, I don't like the idea of having old business, new business on here. Generally, we're supposed to stick to the topics that are on the agenda, the specific topics that are on the agenda. So for this one, I'll generally just say, and I appreciate what John did, kind of a rundown of questions and things like that. If there are questions or burning interests that you have between now and whatever meeting, whether they be next week or whatever, please use your town email and email me and say, hey, I have a question, could you kindly you're welcome to do it, for starters, you're welcome to do it direct yourself to Mr. Gazinski or to Deirdre to ask for some assistance. If it's gonna go on to the agenda, or when I say you can forward your question direct to either the person that you want the answer from, or you can go through Mr. Gazinski or Deirdre as our admin support. If you want something to go on the agenda, please send it to me. It's the chair's discretion as to whether something goes on the agenda. If you have a question, kind of like I discussed tonight about some questions, I think we all did it, some questions for Mr. McKay on PFAS or on lead pipes or this or that or the other, please just email me during the week. We have to have our agendas essentially posted by Friday, Deirdre, the week prior.
It's 48 hours prior to the meeting, but if there's a holiday, like Columbus Day is coming up, it has to be posted by the Friday. I prefer to have it posted on the Friday.
Yep.
And we can always revise it.
Okay, so the rule is 48 hours prior. The practice is usually Friday prior to a Wednesday meeting. So if you have something you're interested in, please send it my way, okay? Meeting minutes. Please take 60 seconds or however long it takes you to just peruse the minutes if you haven't done so already.
Mr. Chair,
Ms. Garzon.
I move that we approve the minutes of July 12th as written.
Second?
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the meeting minutes of July 2nd as written. Discussion.
Mr. Chair,
Ms. Garzon.
thank you, Deirdre, for putting a link there for the road improvements. That's really helpful to have, in our files.
Oh, you're welcome.
Okay, further discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? And we should have maybe 2 abstentions, or 1, because we only had 8 members. Yep. Okay, but 1 abstention,
2.
2 abstentions. Peter and Sarah.
No,
Peter Underhill? No?
not me.
Well, then you can't
Mr.
abstain for
Gatto.
somebody else.
Mr. Gatto was not present for that meeting.
We're aware of that, that's why I said 8. Just joking, I'm just joking. All right, we have 1 abstention, and we have, our new member is abstaining as well from the vote.
But he
You're right,
was in
he
the
is right.
audience.
He is right.
Right.
And he's right.
7:02.
Mr. Underhill is correct. I am wrong, right.
I'm not used to that, I'm married.
I say it all the time. I just embrace it. If I'm wrong, I say it. All right. Finance Committee, we're done there. Any last?
So just,
Go ahead, Deirdre.
I have a question. So next week, the Council on Aging and Lisa Harden will be presenting. The following week is Capital Planning Committee, Pete Germain for the petitioned articles, and the School Department. So
I would like to have Mr. McKay come next week.
next week, that was my question. Okay.
Could you just discuss it with him and let me know? You know, we're on a short schedule, so I really need for
Yes.
him to, you know, be ready. He lives this stuff every day, so it shouldn't take him that long to prepare, so.
Okay, so I have written down the PFAS testing and the lead grant, the lead piping grant. I do believe he's requesting some capital items as well.
Right. He doesn't need to go into much detail on the compressor. You know, I do think we'll want a general PFAS update, not necessarily specific to what new article may or may not show up, but at least on last year's article, it would be nice to know where we stand with those and just a general DPW update, not more than 5 to 10 minutes, and then specifics on items that he is responsible for in the draft warrant, which will be less draft come next Wednesday, you know, after the select board meets.
Okay, great.
Okay? And then we'll plug anybody else in, you know, that needs to be here. Does anybody see anybody else that they really, based on what we were given for tonight's article list? I mean, I think Council on Aging, Mr. Germain, DPW, that covers almost all of them. Carol will cover just about everything else that we would have questions on, including Carol and Mike will cover Article 1, Article 2, unless there's specifics on the Article 2 and the operational budget adjustments. Mike should be able to cover most of those. Capital items will be Mr. Barry and myself. Feasibility study, that will be the school committee. Senior center will be Council on Aging. Gold Star Families we heard about and we'll hear more about. 6 and 7 from town administrator. Number 8, town administrator. Number 9 would be town administrator. Number 10, town administrator. Number 11, DPW, and finance director potentially. That one's really, number 11 is very standard for those that aren't familiar with it. It's the only budget line it's allowed to exceed its authorization and get funded from the next year just due to the timing of snow and ice removal. DPW, number 12, unemployment account. Town administrator, 14, town administrator.
Mr. Chair, would the zoning board have any input into the zoning bylaw change?
Very possibly, yeah.
We've reviewed these before and kind of been caught flat-footed that they weren't run by the boards. I'd like to at least hear their input on that one.
Sure.
Yeah.
They have to hold a hearing. There has to be a hearing held, a public hearing on a zoning change, and to the best of my knowledge, it's done by the
Deirdre, can you ask
Planning board.
for who is the zoning board appeals?
planning
Chair.
board.
Yeah, I
Mr.
have a
Nichols?
question.
Richard Nichols?
Yeah.
Yes.
Nicole Riley?
No.
I think it's Rich
Rich
Nichols.
Nichols?
Oh, okay. All right, I'll reach out to him.
And I think that covers the rest of them.
I would think on next week, probably, if he's available.
Hickory Hills. I'd
Yes,
like to
please,
have
yeah,
a
if
input.
possible,
could Zoom.
if possible, next week, and Zoom is fine too. But yeah, as much as we can get in for next week would be better.
The acceptance of Hickory Hills, is that Jim as well?
I'll leave
Or
that to
planning
Mr.
board?
Gazinski. We'll leave that to Mr. Gazinski, and if he wants somebody to speak to it, he should be able to.
Okay.
I mean,
It's
he already,
usually a
he already
vote.
has, and I don't
Yeah.
have, you know, we'll look at the language of the article when it's written and see if we need more.
We've been talking about it for years.
It's been, I'm wondering, Deirdre, do you know for a fact it's going to be on for this one? Because it's been deferred for a few years.
Which one is that, Kathy? I'm
The,
sorry.
Hickory
Hickory
Hills.
Hills.
Right, so they've been working with Beta Engineering and the residents of Hickory Hills to try to straighten out whatever issues were happening up there. And I believe they've come to an agreement with Bob Fox. And so I think it'll
No.
be fine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. With that, I think we've beat the horse a little bit. I will take a motion.
Move we adjourn?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank
Deirdre.
you.
Thanks, Deirdre.
Thanks, Deidre.
Thanks, John.